Welcome to a world where reality is more terrifying than fiction. These stories you are about to hear are not urban legends or campfire tales. They are true events that will leave you questioning how safe you really are. Tonight I present to you 3 disturbing, true, scary stories. Story 1. The Smiling Man. In the early 2010s, a man named Greg lived in a large city working late-night shifts at a local bar. After clocking out in the early hours of the morning, he often walked home. One night, he was making his usual walk through quiet, desolate streets when something unusual happened. Greg noticed a figure standing under a street lamp in the distance. The man was tall, thin, and dressed in a suit. His back was turned to Greg. He looked harmless, but there was something off about the scene, something that made Greg's instincts buzz with discomfort. As Greg passed him, the man turned around. That's when Greg saw it. The man was grinning from ear to ear, a huge, unnatural smile that stretched far beyond what seemed possible. His eyes were wide, almost bulging, locked onto Greg with an unnerving intensity. At first, Greg thought he was just a drunk or maybe a street performer. He kept walking, but then the man began moving. His movements were bizarre, exaggerated, like someone mimicking a dance. He twirled and swayed as he followed Greg, all the while never breaking eye contact, his grotesque grin growing more unsettling with each step. Greg picked up the pace, but the smiling man matched his speed, always keeping the same distance, dancing closer and closer. By now, panic had set in. He didn't know if this man was dangerous or just deranged, but he wasn't willing to find out. As Greg rounded a corner, he broke into a full sprint, his heart pounding in his chest. But when he glanced back over his shoulder, he saw the man, still dancing, still smiling, and still keeping pace. The smiling man hadn't lost any distance. Greg sprinted all the way to his apartment complex, barely daring to look back. When he reached the door, he fumbled with his keys, trembling, desperately trying to unlock it. Just before the door opened, he glanced over his shoulder one last time. The man had stopped. He was standing about 10 feet away, still smiling. But now, he wasn't dancing anymore. He was just watching Greg with those wide, unblinking eyes as if waiting for something. Cut to black screen. Greg rushed inside, slammed the door, and locked every bolt. He didn't sleep that night. He never saw the smiling man again, but the memory of that twisted grin still haunts him. Was it a harmless encounter with a madman, or was there something far darker lurking behind those eyes? Story 2. The Disappearance of Brandon Swanson. Our second story takes us to Minnesota, where a young college student named Brandon Swanson vanished without a trace in 2008. What makes this case so disturbing is not just the disappearance itself, but the bizarre events that took place in the hours leading up to it. It was the night of May 14th, and Brandon had just finished celebrating the end of the school year with some friends. On his drive home, Brandon's car got stuck in a ditch along a rural gravel road. It was around 2 a.m. when he called his parents asking for a ride. He wasn't sure exactly where he was, but he described the area as being near the town of Lind, not far from his home. His father, Brian, immediately got in the car and drove out to look for him, staying on the phone with Brandon the entire time. They tried to pinpoint his location, but something strange was happening. Brandon insisted he knew where he was, but when his father arrived at the spot Brandon described, there was no sign of him or his car. Frustrated and confused, Brandon told his father he would walk to a nearby town and meet them there. As he continued talking to his parents, something bizarre happened. In the middle of their conversation, Brandon suddenly exclaimed, "Oh, shut!" and then the call cut off. His parents tried calling back repeatedly, but Brandon never answered. Panicked, they immediately called the police and a search was launched. Over the following days, authorities scoured the area where Brandon had last been seen, but neither Brandon nor his car were found. The only clue was his cell phone signal, which was traced to a different location miles away from where he said he was. a rural area with nothing but open fields. Search teams combed through the area using dogs, helicopters, and volunteers, but it was as if Brandon had simply vanished into thin air. To this day, no one knows what caused him to shout those final words, what he saw, or what happened after that. The case remains unsolved, and the Swanson family still searches for answers. Was Brandon the victim of a tragic accident, or did something far more sinister happen on that dark country road? Story 3. The Watcher House. In 2014, a family in Westfield, New Jersey thought they had found their dream home. Derek and Maria Broadus had just purchased a beautiful 6-bedroom house on a quiet, tree-lined street. But soon after moving in, their dream turned into a nightmare. Just 3 days after closing on the house, Derek went to check the mail. Among the usual letters and bills, he found an envelope addressed in thick, clumsy handwriting. The note inside was short but chilling. Dearest new neighbor at 657 Boulevard, allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood. How did you end up here? Did 657 Boulevard call to you with its force within? I have been put in charge of watching it. The letter went on to mention specific details about the Broadus family that only someone watching them could know. It mentioned their children by name and even commented on the type of car they drove. The letter was signed by someone who called themselves the Watcher. The Broadus family was horrified, but they didn't take immediate action. They chalked it up to a prank, a weird neighborhood tradition perhaps. But within a few days another letter arrived. This one was more threatening. I am pleased to know your names now and the names of the young blood you have brought to me. Will the young blood play in the basement, or are they too afraid to go down there alone? I would be very afraid if I were them. It is far away from the rest of the house. If you were upstairs, you would never hear them scream. The letters didn't stop. They became more frequent, and the messages became darker. Whoever was writing them clearly had an obsession with the house and an unhealthy fixation on the family inside. They even began to claim ownership of the house, stating that the Watcher had been monitoring it for decades. Terrified, the Broadus family contacted the police, but the letters kept coming. They tried to trace the source, but no one was ever caught. After months of living in fear, the family decided they couldn't stay any longer. They sold the house at a massive loss and moved far away, but the mystery of the Watcher was never solved. To this day, no one knows who the Watcher was or why they targeted the family. Was it a deranged stalker, a neighbor playing a cruel game, or something more otherworldly? One thing is certain, the Watcher is still out there, and they may have never truly left 657 Boulevard. And there you have it. 3 disturbing true stories that remind us how thin the line between safety and terror truly is. Sometimes the most frightening things aren't in our imagination, but lurking just around the corner, waiting for the right moment to strike. If you enjoyed tonight's stories, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next time we delve into the shadows. Until then, stay safe, stay alert, and remember, sometimes the scariest things are the ones we never see coming.